Welcome, everyone. Today, we are presenting a webinar, Coaching Athletes with Hidden Disabilities. On our panel today, we have Kimberly Iwanski, Nigeia Griffin, and our Director of Safe Sport Education and Policy here at USA Gymnastics, Shelba Waldron.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Shelba Waldron. I'm the Director of Education and Policy for Safe Sport here at USA Gymnastics. I've been at USA Gymnastics for 2.5 years, and before coming to USAG, I worked in the field of youth development, substance abuse, and mental health. Today, we're going to talk about hidden disabilities, a very important topic that anyone who coaches children should be versed in and aware of. March is Disabilities Awareness Month, and we are hoping through this webinar that you won't just heighten your awareness, but learn skills that will help all athletes feel included and know that they have a place in gymnastics. Every child has the right to participate in sport and given the chance to be successful. By knowing how to work with athletes with invisible disabilities, we increase their chances of success and longevity in the sport. I want to introduce you to two fabulous women who contributed to their time and expertise on this topic. I'm going to now turn it over to our presenters, Nigeia Griffin and Kim Iwanski, to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nigeia Griffin. I am a junior college student at Spelman College, where I study psychology and neuroscience. I'm also a former USAG athlete, and I came to USAG because I want everyone to understand how to coach athletes that come from diverse backgrounds.
And hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Iwanski, and I have been a special education teacher for over 20 years. I've worked with many kids who've been diagnosed with various disabilities. I also have children of my own who are in the USAG program.
All right.
So what are the objectives of this webinar? The objectives are to gain a better understanding of the unique challenges of athletes with disabilities, to gain new strategies for working with athletes with hidden disabilities, to become more comfortable working with and coaching athletes with disabilities, and to learn new strategies on building an inclusive environment. So what is a disability? A disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of an individual, a diagnosis of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment.
According to the Dreamscape Foundation, in the United States alone, almost 50 million people have at least one form of a disability, from physical impairments to mental ones. These challenges pose limitations on their lives and the world's accessibility. To put that number into perspective, take a look around you next time you're in the gym. Count the number of people you see, from the parents to the athletes, and then your fellow staff members. Compare it to the statistic that 1 out of every 5 Americans has a disability. How many people in the gym on any given night have a disability when you think about those statistics?
So what is a hidden disability? A hidden disability is an invisible disability that is a physical, mental, or neurological condition that is not visible from the outside, yet can limit or challenge a person's movements, senses, or activities.
According to the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, an individual with a disability is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits their life activities. The bottom line is that everyone with a disability is different, with varying challenges and needs, as well as abilities and attributes. Thus, we all should learn to listen with our ears instead of judging with our eyes. That is the reason we define invisible disability.
So now we're going to transition into bias and ableism. Bias is the tendency, inclination, or prejudice toward or against something or someone. A bias is created by social, political, and environmental obstacles that turn impairments into disabilities. So most bias stereotypes do not come from a place of bad intent. It's just deep-seated, unconscious stereotype that's been formed in our brains through years of different influences that we often have no control over. Biases affect our decision-making processes in a number of different ways in practically every day of our lives. So this includes our perception, which is how we see people and perceive reality, our attitude, which is how we react towards certain people, our behaviors, how receptive or friendly we are towards certain people, our attention, which aspects of a person we pay most attention to, our listening skills, how much we actively listen to what certain people say, and our microaffirmations, which is how much or how little we comfort certain people in certain situations. Next, we're going to talk about ableism. So ableism is discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. Ableism is a prejudice against or disregard for the needs of persons with disabilities. there are multiple different types of bias. So the bias that we're going to focus on is implicit bias. And implicit or unconscious bias is defined as the process of associating stereotypes or attitudes toward categories of people without our conscious awareness. So some examples of implicit bias include perhaps making comments on minority athletes' different hair textures or body features without intentionally trying to offend them.
I think another example would also be when working with a male student. Some take a more direct or stronger approach when you're working with a male, but when you're working with a female student, some tend to take more of a softer approach.
One of the things that we talk about implicit bias, I want you to think about these questions. When you know an athlete has a hidden disability, do you begin to see the disability before the person? Do you automatically make assumptions about a specific disability? Do you automatically believe that a child with a disability will be harder to work with or not be as successful? Do you make assumptions that a person with a hidden disability is faking it? Thoughts and feelings are implicit if we are unaware of them or mistaken about their nature. We have a bias when, rather than being neutral, we have a preference for or aversion to a person or group of people. Going back to what Nigeria and Kim were talking about, it is our aversion or our preference to those people. We use the term implicit bias to describe when we have attitudes towards people or associate stereotypes with them without our conscious knowledge.
In human nature, we tend to build assumptions based off our own interactions and experience. In relation to disabilities, here are some. So disabilities are static conditions and cannot change. Disabilities are easy to prove. Unfair for someone with a hidden disability to have special treatment. A person's disability defines their identity as an individual. If someone has a disability, they are unable to make their own decisions. Learning disabilities usually correspond with a low IQ. Hidden disabilities will fade over time. And hidden disabilities are faked or exaggerated to gain privilege or sympathy.
When we were planning this workshop and doing research, one of the things that I wanted to do was bring the story of people with disabilities to life. And so one of the things that I did, I went on Twitter and I put in the hashtag disability or hashtag hidden disability to try to see what would pop up. And I found Raven the Science Maven. If you have Twitter, you need to go and follow Raven the Science Maven. I've learned that she is just fabulous. Raven actually, I don't know if we call her Miss Maven or Raven, but Raven the Science Maven told a story one day on Twitter, and she used an entire thread. And I'm going to read that thread exactly the way she wrote it. And as I'm reading it, I'm going to highlight certain phrases that show what type of bias and discrimination that people with disabilities deal with every day, and then how it made her feel. So, I have ADHD, and I want to share something that happened. I recently did a shoot with a network. They didn't have a teleprompter and were feeding me lines verbally. They said it took me 2 times as long to complete filming than other people and were visibly disappointed. I asked them several times, please don't feed me the lines. I can't remember this, even though I know you just said it to me. Even though these are simple short sentences. They didn't have a teleprompter and refused to accommodate me at all. It was very frustrating. I almost cried. I said, I have ADHD and I am trying my best to recall what you were saying, but I really can't do this how you're asking me to do it. I then had to explain that memory recall tests are literally how kids are diagnosed, and they had a front seat to me failing this test hard. I can tell they never worked with a scientist with any type of learning impairment or disability, and I definitely felt judged. They seemed to not be able to connect the fact that I was sharing really cool science knowledge with the fact that I also have an impairment. I was super disappointed by the lack of accommodations, and I wanted to walk off the set so bad when they told me that they wouldn't put the words on a screen for me to read, even after I almost started crying. For them, it was just a matter of copying and pasting.
Shelby, can I jump in and just say that this happens more often than you think. So often people focus on others' weaknesses and they get frustrated. Other people get frustrated with these weaknesses instead of focusing on what these people really do have to offer.
And and this is the crux of what we're trying to do today is our athletes who do have a hidden disability, they're going into an able-bodied world and making simple accommodations. Just like Raven the Science Maven, a simple accommodation of the words on the teleprompter would have made her experience much more beneficial to her, much more peaceful to her as well. Same thing with our athletes.
So what does it mean to have an inclusive athletic environment? This means that all people can fully participate as an athlete, coach, parent, or volunteer and feel safe from abuse, harassment, or unfair criticism. This also means that the organization takes responsibility for the design of programs that meet the needs of all people instead of just some people. And we will give some tips on how to build an inclusive environment later in our presentation.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So hidden disabilities we most often see in sport. These are the ones we're going to talk about today. The autism spectrum disorder, ADD, ADHD, general anxiety disorder, processing disorders, learning disabilities, speech and language disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorder. Before we jump into these specific disabilities, what I want to do quickly is I want to bring to life the number of people in our society, the number of children that have various disabilities. 1 in 6 children in the US have a developmental disability. So if you have a team of 12 kids, then of 12 athletes, then you have 2 kids potentially who have some sort of developmental disability. 2.3 million public school students have IEPs for learning disability. An IEP, in case you don't know, gives it gives accommodations for children with disabilities. 7 out of 10 kids with IEPs for learning disabilities spend 80% or more of their school day in general educational classrooms. This is important because many people think of that old school mentality of the special ed classroom. And what this statistic is saying is actually most of the kids spend their time in the general education classrooms. 1 in 50 students receive accommodations for disabilities called a 504. The 504 and the IEP are federally mandated for the school system to offer those accommodations. The most common type of disability for students in pre-kindergarten through 12th grade involves specific learning disabilities. And here's just a few other numbers to think about. Approximately 4.4 million children have been diagnosed with anxiety. That's 7.1%. Approximately 1.9 million have diagnosed depression. That's 3.2%. Now, that doesn't mean we're not necessarily going to be talking about mental health today, but it's important to understand that when we are talking about disability in general, we have to also consider that there is a mental health component and depression falls within that. So the next one in 54 8-year-old children have been identified as having fall on the autism spectrum disorder. 6.1 million, 9.4% of children have been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, and approximately 15% of the entire population has dyslexia. These are impressive and incredible numbers. And it is the fact that we don't talk about it, the fact that we don't have a general knowledge as society is fairly concerning. So when you think about the kids you work with, plus their parents, plus the staff members or your other coaches, think about that one of them, if not several of them, could have a various disability that you are not aware of. So in this part 2, the next part we're going to do is we're going to talk about the specifics. We're going to break down the disabilities and help you understand a little bit about the characteristics and then how to work with children with disabilities.
So the first disability we're going to talk about is the autism spectrum disorder. And this disability it's on a wide range spectrum. It is characterized by restricted patterns of behavior and impairments in social communication and interactions. So when you look at this disorder, what you may see in the gym is the first and foremost is usually these type of students will not look at you. They cannot maintain eye contact. Another thing is they're very ritualistic in their routines. If you try and deviate from the routine a bit, they may get nervous. They may have a meltdown. The other thing is they're very black and white in their thinking. They have a very hard time of of changing that anyway or having that gray area. Finally, they don't socialize much. You know, you may see them standing off to the side, or if someone tries to socialize with them, they may give them very short answers, but really don't interact much. And they also do not get sarcasm very well. So if you talk to them and, you know, tell them a joke, they may not get it because they're, like I said, they're very black and white in their thinking. So, or they might even interpret it the wrong way.
Would you say, Kim, that athletes who are on the spectrum have a hard time making eye contact with the coach?
Yes.
Um,
Definitely.
and would you say that it looks like sometimes they're being disrespectful?
Yes. Sometimes they'll look up at the sky, or you might even think they're ignoring them or ignoring you, but they really aren't. They literally just have a hard time focusing and making eye contact. So,
All right.
okay, the next one is attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity disorder. The only difference between the two of those is with attention deficit disorder, the child just doesn't maintain focus, whereas attention deficit hyperactivity, the child just seems like they're full of energy and they cannot sit still. In the gym, you may see that they lose things very easily. They may not have their grips with them, or they'll leave a sock somewhere and their grip somewhere else. They forget things very often. They forget pieces of their uniform. They're impulsive with their thinking. You might say to them, go get your water bottle, and they may run across the street to get it. I'm sorry. They may run across the floor to get their water bottle and not thinking that someone's actually coming, doing a routine. They forget to tell their parents details quite often. So if you tell them to go home and tell their parents something, it may not get there. They don't pay attention very well. When they do, they pay attention maybe for a minute or two, and then they see someone doing something and they'll turn their focus over to watching what is happening across the room. They also tend to get easily frustrated with themselves if they can't do something quickly or good. So, and then they might get upset and maybe throw a temper tantrum because they're so frustrated.
You know, my son he has diagnosed attention deficit disorder, and he takes medication for it. And if he doesn't have his medication and he doesn't take it in the morning, then remembering things when he's a gymnast, and he will forget the grips. He will forget, you know, in men's gymnastics, you have to have you have the shorts and you have the pants when you go to a meet. You have to remind him of every part of the uniform. Do you have your shorts? Do you have the pants? Do you have your black socks? Do you have your grips? Do you have your team jacket? And it's crucial that we give them these constant reminders. I would have a list in the kitchen that he would put in his gym bag, and he would put it in there and he would check it against that list to make sure he had everything. Do you have your water bottle? Do you have your snack? If they were doing one of those longer Saturday practices. So it's really important. Those lists are important to them.
That's funny that you say that, because my son has attention deficit hyperactivity, and I took him to a camp once and he forgot his grips all the way back home. That was 4 hours away.
Well, a long drive back for grips.
Yep.
But, you know, I think it's important that coaches understand that instead of getting frustrated with them or yelling at them, that we help them remember. So if they know that the child has ADD or ADHD or a learning disability, you know, say, hey, remember, we've got the meet tomorrow. Do you have your list? And don't forget the grips, don't forget this. So just patience is crucial.
Generalized anxiety disorder. I will admit that I am seeing kids with anxiety in the school system more and more these days. Um, Basically, when a child has anxiety, they worry constantly. They worry if they're doing the right thing. They worry, if they have everything, if they're forgetting something. It's very irrational what they're worrying about, but it is real to them. So, but kids who also have anxiety disorder, they're perfectionists. They want to make sure everything is right. um, they need constant routine, because when they don't have that routine and they feel everything's in chaos, it worries them. They seem very nervous a lot of times, kids with anxiety. When they are nervous and they are experiencing that anxiety, you're going to get that fight or flight response, which means that if they're experiencing anxiety and you're telling them or placing a demand on them to do something, they're either A, gonna fight back. And what I mean by fight back is they might have short, snotty responses or give you attitude, or they might draw back and try and escape from what you're trying to tell them to do. Sometimes too, kids um, who have anxiety, they can sometimes to be a little bit um, avoidish, I guess I could say, or sometimes a little aggressive at times. Um, and they're, like I said, they're short with their answers. And the last but not least is that they do not like to be put into the spotlight. Kids with anxiety, that makes them nervous, and they will do anything to get out of that spotlight.
We are having dog problems.
I know.
This is the problem with doing webinars at home. So I wanted to tell our audience that we normally don't have dog problems on webinars. But anyway, one of the things that I wanted to bring up while you were talking, and I didn't know if Nigeria wanted to jump in on this, or even Emily, who's out there, they were both gymnasts. Gymnastics is a perfectionist sport. I didn't know if you found your anxiety heightened because of that perfectionism. So I wanted to turn it over to Nigeria if you had any comments on that.
Gymnastics is a sport where everyone has the same goal. Everyone is striving to be perfect. And so it definitely increases nerves and just nervousness. And sometimes like those things end up causing physical reactions. And so it's just really important for coaches to, remain patient with their gymnasts, because everyone takes competitions, everyone takes practices, and everyone takes criticism differently.
And they're always trying to get that perfect score. And so when you already have a sport that lends itself to high anxiety because of perfection, and then you add on top of that general anxiety disorder, it could be a recipe for disaster. And so it's so important to stay positive with these athletes, to build on their self-esteem. Speech and language.
Okay, children with speech and language disorders, they basically, it's difficulties with expressive and receptive language, meaning when you're talking to a child who has a speech and language disorder, when they take in what you're saying, it takes them time to process what they're saying, what you're saying to them. And then receptive language is when they actually want to think about what they want to say to you. It may take them a minute to process what they're trying to get out to you. Usually kids that have speech and language disorders, it's usually say that they have a hard time getting the right words out with what they want to say. Or another thing is, if you ask them to tell you something like a story, they'll have trouble putting that story in order. Which again, like I said, this now leads into processing disorders. And there's another one out there called auditory processing disorder, which when they take in the information, if it's in a very noisy environment, they cannot distinguish between the sounds. So if you're talking to them in the gym, what they're hearing sometimes isn't making sense. Like they literally cannot understand or even hear what you're saying. They do not have a hearing disability. Like they're not, they don't have a loss of hearing. They literally just can't make out what the distinct sound or that you're making for that word. So when you have a student that has a processing disability in this situation, um, they when you're talking to them, you may not think they're understanding you, or you may not think they're even paying attention to you. Or they also may ask you a lot of questions like, well, what am I supposed to do now? And as a result, you like I said, you think they're not paying attention when they really are. They really just can't interpret the exact sounds of the words of what you're trying to say. Kids with learning disabilities. Now, in the school system, I will say this is the most common disability we see in the schools. You may not see this this may not come out as much in the gym, because really when we talk about a learning disability in the schools, we're talking about a disability in reading, writing, and math. Um, when it comes to their IQs, though, they actually have average IQs. It's just that their ability to learn how to read, write, and do math is below the average rate of their peers. Um, the different areas we see is they'll have difficulty with reading comprehension. For example, they may be able to read exactly what's in front of them, but they don't comprehend the meaning of those words. They also may have a disability in reading decoding, which means there's the words in front of them, but they cannot sound out the words to make sense of what they even are. Math reasoning is when a student cannot decide whether they're supposed to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. And then a disability in math calculations would be just simple arithmetic, adding, subtracting, multiplication, division. And then writing disabilities is when a student cannot organize their thoughts to put down on paper. They have trouble with grammar, punctuation, and spelling. So where you may see this is in the gym. If you give a list for a student to follow, they may have difficulties actually reading your list. They may have difficulties, if you ask them to keep a journal, they might have difficulties writing down what you're asking. So anything, pertaining to reading or writing mostly. I don't think you'd see much math though in the gym.
They do have to count routines, and not thinking that that's really going to show up much, because it really is counts through 1 through 8 or maybe 1 through 16.
Yeah.
But there's constant learning happening. And we also need to be aware that many of our clubs offer homeschooling. So the athletes who are higher on the levels, like who are higher up in the levels, they will often be homeschooled within the gym. And it's really important that we take into those learning disabilities as well into the homeschooling if they are within the gym, because that might not be diagnosed as if they were in the school system.
And this obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder actually goes along with anxiety disorder. A child who has anxiety a lot of times does have obsessive compulsive. You will see obsessive compulsive in waves. For example, when the anxiety is high, you may see this more because they're trying to control what's going on in their life. So, for example, in the gym, you may see a child who needs to count so many routines. Like if in their mind, they need to get 5 perfect back walkovers on the beam, and it needs to be perfect. So they're only going to count those perfect ones. Another thing is you might see a lot of hand washing or use of hand sanitizer. They might do a routine and get off and automatically have to hand sanitize. They're also very, very hard on themselves because, again, they're perfectionists. They have to make sure it's just right in order for it to be good or to be counted in their world. So
we need to be really careful. Well, with any athlete, but athletes with anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder, when they go to a meet, when they compete, they might expect a level of perfection that's not possible, or a level of perfection that just simply as a human being, as an athlete, they might not quite get as far as that they want at that meet because of just how competition works. And we need to be careful on how we respond to them relating to scores and about their routines. It's important to ask questions such as, how do you think you did? I'm very proud of you. You should be proud of the success you had today. You should be proud of the work you put in this week or the work you put in at this meet. It's really important that we don't put judgments on those scores, specifically with the athletes with OCD, anxiety.
You know,
And
I
go
see
ahead.
one
I'm
more
sorry.
thing. That's okay. Another thing I was going to say that you jogged my memory is that kids with OCD have a hard time moving on if they feel that they haven't achieved what they were supposed to at that moment. So they might be stuck with doing something on the beam because they feel it wasn't good enough. So, like you said, it's important for the coach to be positive and say, hey, you did a great job. You know, what you did, you accomplished this. Try and pick out something that they accomplished that day on that specific event. So that way they, in their mind, can then move on to the next event.
So we're gonna shift a little bit into part 3. We're gonna start talking about the journey. One of the things that we tend to forget, as not just as coaches, but sometimes parents forget as well, but we often forget that there's an entire journey that goes with each person in that gym environment. The coach had a journey, the athlete had a journey, and the parent. Today we're going to start with the parent's journey. Children with disabilities have a lifelong journey, and it will follow them all throughout their life. And that journey, they deal with bias. If we go back and we talk about and consider bias and discrimination and then bullying, many of these children have been dealing with this their entire lives. Their parents have been dealing with this their entire lives. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim for this next piece on the parent's journey, so we can talk about what it is that they have been going through since the very beginning. So when you are interacting with them as the parent of the athlete, you have a little bit more, a coach might have a little bit more empathy and knowing and understanding where they're coming from.
So as you know, I'm a special education teacher, but I also am a mother of 3. And one of my children does have a diagnosis of anxiety disorder. And, when she was, God, she wasn't even 1 yet. And I noticed that she would hide behind the couch, or she would line up her toys. So at a very young age, I started to notice that she wasn't really meeting certain milestones. So because of that, I said something to her doctor, and her doctor sent her to a specialist, a developmental specialist, just to see if everything was developing the way it was supposed to. When we went to see the specialist, that is when we found out that she actually had anxiety disorder. She had social anxiety disorder, but she also had pica induced anxiety because she loved to eat lotion at one. Um, so from there, she was able to receive special early intervention services. And so, every day she went for special services to help deal with that anxiety. Then, on top of all that, we were asked, do you want to try medication? And that journey as well, when you start to try medication, it's a roller coaster, because you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. The same thing with kids out with ADHD. You don't know what's going to work and not work. So you try something for a couple weeks and see if it works. If it doesn't, you take them off. And even when they're on it, it might cause them to be sleepy or irritable or hyper. You just don't know what to expect. So it's such a roller coaster when you're trying meds. Some will work, some won't. And then you start all over again with the whole 2-week cycle. When your child finally does reach a milestone, like for example, when my daughter finally stopped eating lotion, we were excited, we were happy. When my son finally could write his name because he couldn't stay focused for longer than 2 seconds, we were excited. It was a milestone. So those milestones are huge. The other thing is when you start to, when those your children start to get into those school years, that's when their friendships form, and that's when the play dates start, and the groups for that. And sometimes, because my daughter was she was not very social because she was nervous to talk to people, she didn't get invited to birthday parties. So you start to feel a little bit isolated. And when you do find someone that you can relate to, you start to talk, and that's when you start to form those friendships. But you feel that separation.
Kim, I'm sorry,
No,
Kim,
go ahead.
would you say that being a parent of a child with disabilities, would you say that it's lonely for the parent sometimes?
Yes, it is lonely, because you know that birthday parties are happening, and when your child's not invited, um, or the other kids in the class were like the other girls and your child wasn't, you start to, you feel sad, and you're just like, well, what's wrong with my child? Or why won't you invite my child? What did, is there something that happened? Did she do? What can I do to help her to do that? But it's more, I think it more comes down to the fact that the parents just don't even understand. So what's going on in the child's life. But once, after a while though, you do then sort of find someone who has been through the same situation as you have, and you start to share those experiences, and that's, you start to build your own group who's been on the same journey with you. So, but again, as well, when you start to have all that rejection, you face it, you do tend to get overprotective of your child. You become that mama bear that, you're surrounding that child, and you want to make sure that nothing else comes to make them feel rejected or not wanted. Um,
I might have flipped the slide too soon, but so what would you like parents to know? What would you like coaches to know?
I think first and foremost is that we want to work with you. We want to be we want to be with you. We want you to know our child's strengths and our weaknesses. Um, we we want you to know what's going to make our child have a meltdown. Okay. And we want you to understand that we already know what makes them tick. So please use the strategies that we're giving you. Try and develop them into the gym if you can. um the other thing is please don't be afraid to come and ask us too if something happened, or what, to try something new. And also, when you are talking with us, please do it in a confidential way. We don't like to really be talked to out in the open in front of everyone in the gym. Send us an email, call us. That's better, instead of doing it open in front of everyone. And know too that we have spent our entire life advocating for our child. We want you to know that some of the things we've had to fight for has not been easy. And yes, we are cautious at times. We don't mean to be, but I think at the same time, we've watched our child go through so much that we're cautious to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And of course, last but not least, we definitely don't want our child to be bullied or, not included by others. So anything that we can do to help you so that way our child is included is definitely our first and foremost.
I just want to add that part of my job back, I come from Florida, and I used to work with a government agency where part of my job was to go into schools and help teachers and principals and parents understand bullying. And one of the things that people were just stunned by was the statistic that children with hidden disabilities are the hot one, not the highest, but close to the highest group of kids that are bullied. And so if that's happening in the school system, chances are, if you have children with hidden disabilities, there's a good chance it could happen in your gym. So make sure that you have very strong anti-bullying policies. We're going to talk quickly about the child's journey. It is actually very similar to the parent's journey. Children with disabilities have been on this journey their entire lives. They are aware of who they are and that there are times and situations where they will struggle more than most. Empathy, listening, and patience is crucial in offering the athlete a full experience. It's also the first step of inclusion. These athletes, these children are aware of rejection. They have been often punished for their behavior. They realize when they are not included. They know when they're not part of the group. They know that they're not popular, and that creates a stigma. And so their interactions start to become that stigma. They have struggled with certain milestones, like the developmental milestones that, what I've always considered them arbitrary. So, when babies are born, there's a certain time when they're supposed to roll over. There's a certain time when they're supposed to crawl, walk, say their ABCs, et cetera. And some of these children, they don't hit those milestones exactly in 18 months or exactly in 24 months. And their parents and them have been aware of that because they've been told by doctors, they've been told by teachers. They see their parents, their not their parents, but their friends, children meet those milestones. So they're very aware of where they are or where they have been. They've often been taunted by their peers. They've often been misdiagnosed. I'm sure that Kim probably has more than one story on misdiagnosis.
Absolutely.
They frequently have been adjusting to meds. We talked a little bit about that. And they're frequently told they aren't putting in effort or they're not trying hard enough when in fact, they're actually probably trying just as hard, if not harder, because they are very aware of the milestones that they had missed earlier in life. And they're so oftentimes trying to make up for that. Kim, I didn't know if you wanted to add to that or if you wanted me to move on.
No, I was just going to say, and by the time this has all happened, their self-esteem is very low, and their self-perception of is low as well. And so they are not going to be the kid at times that is going to put themselves out there because they're just afraid they're going to fail anyways. So that's why positive encouragement is so important when you're dealing with a child who has a disability. And going back to your misdiagnosed, absolutely. So I will tell you that they thought my daughter actually had autism when she was younger because of how she was. But again, like I said, it was just she's got severe social anxiety.
Okay, so when we were putting this together, I reached out to some coaches and I wanted to know what they wanted parents to know. And this is some of the stuff they came back with. They don't have expertise in working with children with disabilities. This may be their first interaction. So if we have any parents who are listening to this, we also need a little bit of patience on your side as well. Time, class size, and competitive pressures make it difficult to individualize training. So a little bit of patience on how they try to implement various alternatives to coaching will go a long way. But they want you to know that they want to learn and they want to figure it out. Have patience as they ask questions and find the best and find methods to coach your child. Please follow protocol on communication. Regardless of what's happening, there's always a time and a place for every conversation. And push pause before sending abrupt emails and making terse statements. Remember that a lot of the coaches, they don't make a lot of money. A lot of them are doing that simply for the love of the sport, for the love of the athletes. And they're spending a lot of time away from their own children or their own families. Sometimes they're coming from what they call their real jobs. So I've heard a number of coaches say that, but they're coming from their day job and they're going to coach at night. So oftentimes just a little bit of patience on that, and a little bit of empathy and working together is what they truly want. The last part of our presentation today, we're going to talk about getting the most out of the athletes with disabilities. And the first thing we're going to start with, we're going to give brief within each disability. Kim's going to go over some quick quick things you can do to help give the best experience for the athlete?
Dealing with a child that has anxiety, first and foremost, always speak very calmly to the child. Have that "it's okay" type attitude, like that. Don't worry, it's fine. We'll get through this. Let's work together. But also validate what they're thinking as well, because it's important for them to realize that you do care and you want to work with them. Once they feel that way, offer to guide them, so that they see that, yep, let's work together, let's take it one step at a time, and make sure to break those tasks down for them so they start to feel successful. Once you see them getting the first step, make sure to praise them quickly and often. Kids with autism, you have to be very direct, but use very simplistic language as well. Less is more with them. Have very limited visual and auditory stimuli if you can. And like I said, give very clear directions. Don't use sarcasm. And again, praise goes a long way with them. For kids with auditory processing, again, visuals. Make sure that you tell them specifically one step at a time what you would like them to do. The other thing is, sometimes if you physically move their body the way you want them to move, that helps as well. Repeat the directions often, and have them stand near you to try and block out that background noise. For kids with visual processing, give them verbal directions along with the written directions. And again, they also they also benefit when you guide their body through those tasks. Kids with sensory processing, make sure to give them one direction at a time and really limit that auditory and visual stimuli. And then kids with ADD or ADHD, have frequent check-ins with them, meaning, see if they're really understanding what you're saying. Have them repeat back to you what you're asking them to do. Definitely always keep them busy and moving, because the minute you stop, they then lose focus and focus on something else that they may see going on in the gym. Often repeat the directions for them so they stay on task, and as well, give them one direction at a time so that they're waiting for the next one. Offer fidgets to kids with ADHD, because many times they don't know what to do with their body. So if you offer them a fidget, it keeps their hands busy. And again, have them stand near you so that you can keep them focused using visuals and auditory. Kids with speech and language, the first and foremost, simplify your directions to them. Simplify the wording in your directions. Use visuals. Give them wait time to respond, because remember, they have to take in that language and it takes them a bit to process it before they understand what you're saying. So wait time is key. Do not give them more, like do not fire off 3 questions at them, because they won't be able to take that in and manipulate it and then give you an answer. And then as well, repeat the directions often and have them near you. And then kids with learning disabilities, make sure to give them written and verbal directions. You may need to go over the directions one step at a time. You may need to read them aloud as well as have them written. Use visuals when you can, and pair them with a buddy so that buddy may be able to read to them or help them spell things. For example, if you're having the kids do journal writing, be aware that it may not be spelled correctly, so you may need to sit with the child and have them read to you what they wrote, if you can't read it. And as well, again, if you have a list of things to do, make sure to read it aloud for them, so that they can understand what you're asking. And of course, teaching routines in varying ways is the key. Remembering that, every kid is different, every kid is unique. So if you're able to teach one routine, but do it in different ways, that's key for everyone. So
I would like to add that with all of these, specifically autism and anxiety and a little bit of the OCD, I would like to add that when they go into a different environment, such as at a meet, or if they go to a clinic that is in someone else's gym, it's important that you give them the option and give the parent the option for them to come early. So they can get used to the environment, they can hear the noises, they can get accustomed to the smells, and they can start building their routine and they can start getting comfortable. And it might not hurt to also talk to the meet director and to maybe give the athlete an opportunity to just walk around from event to event, to start getting to be able to physically see where the judges are and to see how everything is set up. Many times that will release a lot of their anxiety and stress, and that will, as we call the meltdowns, that will often prevent a meltdown.
You also jogged my memory on one other thing. Even in the gym at practice, having an actual area in the gym for those kids to go to when they're feeling anxious or like they're going to have a meltdown. So just to keep it together, have them, have a special place where they can go and recollect themselves and then come back to the practice.
So how do
Um,
you, sorry.
Go ahead, Nigeria. This is all you.
So how do you build an inclusive environment? So make sure to encourage all athletes to set physical and emotional boundaries. It's very important to set expectations about the treatment of each other. Make sure to offer different levels of participation, to create a low stimulus area for calming areas, to eliminate reward programs that aren't measurable, such as most improved, best performer, or best leader, to set measurable, attainable goals that are individualized for each athlete.
I want to go back. I'm sorry. I want to talk about real quick the awards programs. A lot of times, and it's in schools, it's in every sport, even in church. Sometimes it's the person who listened the best. It's the person who was able to answer the most questions. We need to be careful at these awards that are not measurable, because often, how do you choose the most improved? How do you choose the best performer? Because oftentimes children with disabilities have never received these awards. And they hate when these moments come up at banquets, when these start. The best leader. If somebody is shy, if somebody has anxiety disorder, if somebody has autism or is on the spectrum, then they struggle with being a leader. They go into the environment and they are just simply quiet. They believe that just doing your job is being a leader. So a lot of these awards are actually not very inclusive. A measurable award could be the person who made the most gains with their routines that year. I mean, I guess you could put something to the effect of who was able to add the bonus by the end of the year, or the most bonuses by the end of the year. Those are just ideas. I'm actually not a fan of any of them, because every athlete is on their own journey. And when we start putting awards on those journeys, it starts to exclude kids. Another one that I want to go back to the top is encouraging all athletes to set physical and emotional boundaries. That one's important. We have to teach our own children. So the parents need to teach their children, and the coaches need to help the children set their own boundaries, like in terms of their personal space, in terms of what what they're going to allow someone to say to them. Because oftentimes children with disabilities actually struggle with personal space. They don't know how to tell someone to back off. They also sometimes get into someone else's personal space. They also don't know when someone is bullying them, they sometimes feel as if it is being part of the group. So we also have to encourage them and teach them to set their own physical and emotional boundaries. I'm sorry, Nigeria. Now we can get going with this one.
Shelba, when you were talking about the awards, one thing that would be good is, if every week if the coach would just say one thing that each one of the athletes improved on, but it's individual,
Mhm.
so.
That's a really good point. And that also in terms of rewards. Everything doesn't have to be about gymnastics. Things can be fun too. It can be like, who has the best singing voice or things like that. It doesn't have to be about gymnastics. I think what makes it more fun would not, so much dock an athlete's confidence is if, it's just more about like personality or like, things like that. So it doesn't have to be all about gymnastics all the time.
Right.
I think that's a great comment. So go ahead, Nigeria. Let's do the second slide.
So in terms of building an inclusive environment, it's also meaning to give everyone opportunities to lead. So this could be like leading warm-ups, leading conditioning. It gives everyone that confidence that they can be a leader. Don't make the child on the outside do the work.
I was just going to say, and even just leaving the line to the next event, the child is the first in line to the next event as they walk.
And to teach all team members to work together to help each other on their weaknesses while also cheering on their strengths. So this can look like doing an inter squad meet and having all the teams count their routines, and whichever team has the highest score can win. So it's just really cheering on each other. And so in the end, the reward will be based off a group instead of individualized. I think that'll really like, make sure that everyone is working together and just, things like that. And also make sure to differentiate instruction and building in modifications and accommodations. And finally, get to know your athletes and build standards and/or boundaries around their comfort levels and goals. So how do you get the most out of your athletes? To be positive, to get to know your athlete, like their background, their interests, the way their personality is, set consistent boundaries, remain calm when speaking, maintain routines, validate their concern, and use their strengths to help build upon their weaknesses.
So in the last couple of slides, we're going to talk about building self-worth. This really is for anybody. Oftentimes, we've been talking about disabilities, but really we should always be building the self-worth of our athletes. Focus on what they do well while building up their weakness. Work with the athlete and the parent to set realistic goals. This is so important. I can't stress that oftentimes many of the reports we'll see in the Safe Sport office is there will be times when where anxiety came from on all parts is the coach had one goal, the athlete had another goal, and the parent had another goal. Set realistic goals. Do not compare to other athletes' personalities and behaviors. Remember that kids with hidden disabilities oftentimes will be shy. They won't often be outgoing, or they are simply uncomfortable in social situations. Encourage cheering on the teammates. Offer chances to lead. Use phrases of support. I know it's hard, but I believe in you. You're making so much progress. You got this. And then some of the suggestions for the clubs and coaches is put strong anti-bullying policies in place. I cannot stress this enough. If the athletes are not aware of it's not just about sportsmanship, it's literally how we treat each other. It's how they treat each other. And they need to be aware that treating a teammate, calling names, isolating them, throwing parties where everyone's invited and except that one person, and it's deliberate, it's not going to be tolerated. And so it's the club and the coaches that set that standard. Set yearly consistent meetings with all parents and athletes. Once again, I cannot stress this enough. If everybody's not on the same page, it's ripe for problems. Be fair with consequences. So if name calling deserves one consequence, everybody gets that consequence. If they name call. If they are cheating, let's say you said do X amount of push-ups and someone cheats, there should be a consequence, but it should be fair consequences. Practice equal attention. Give everybody your attention. Some nights you're going to have to give more to Susie, and other nights you're going to have to give more to Becky, but really practice what equal attention looks like. Create low sensory spaces. This isn't just for children with disabilities. This is for anybody. This also could be for the coaches. You know, there needs to be a space where somebody can go to if they feel that their emotions are getting out of control, that they don't necessarily want to start crying in front of the team, that they might need to go and collect themselves. The low sensory space could have, it could just be a room with a low light, you know, with a lamp that, you know, maybe some sort of cloth over it that dims the lights. It could have some relaxing music. It could have even one of those water fountains, anything that allows the athlete to bring their blood pressure, to bring the anxiety down. And finally, I know that it seems to be repetitive, but we can't say it enough. Set the yearly meetings, get everyone on the same page. Tells the parent something good about their child. I'm a parent, Kim's a parent, and I know that we love to hear good things about our child, because oftentimes I think people without children don't understand that when we get calls from the school, it actually sends our anxiety, because we're like, oh my God, what has happened? You know, and sometimes we just want someone to call us and say, hey, your kid did great today.
Yeah, and
You
that's
know,
funny you say that. As a teacher myself, like I'll make a phone call and the first thing I have to say sometimes is everything's fine. This is actually great. I wanted to call and let you know that, so and so did a great job today and I was very proud of them. So,
I've had several teachers call me over the years or send me an email, and they will literally start with everything is fine.
mhm.
And then, but I just wanted you to be aware of something. Or sometimes, you know, it really is truly, it just warms your heart. I had my son's social studies teacher sent me a message about a month ago, and he said, I just want you to know that Josh was the only person who got 100 on the test. I felt like running through the streets. I was so excited. Like and I would have never, like, yeah, I can look at his grade and say, yeah, he got 100 on the test. But to know that he accomplished that was a huge deal. So anytime that you can tell the parent something good about their child, please do. Talk to each other, even when things are going well. It doesn't always have to be negative. Compliment each other. Parents should compliment coaches. Coaches should compliment the parents. You don't have to wait on Christmas to give them the card and say, hey, thanks, you know, you're doing a great job. You know, always make sure that your coach knows how, especially if your kid loves them, and and you know they're bringing in that female or male influence in their life, that outside influence. Set measurable goals with the child's input. Use the child. The child deserves to have a say in their sporting career. Be realistic, and communication is the key. And with that, I just want to give both Kim and Nigeria a chance to give some final thoughts. So Nigeria.
Well, I just want to say, like, to make sure that you guys all take the time to really get to know your athletes on a personal level. I think that's really important. You'll start to find their strengths and weaknesses, ways to boost their confidence. And I think that's really important for an athlete to not even grow as a gymnast, but grow as a person.
Kim.
Yeah, and I would just like to say that the more communication you have between each other, the better off it's going to be, especially that positive communication. When you guys can give compliments back and forth, that's the more you can do that. That's great, because when a situation does arrive, I think the communication is going to be easier to solve that problem. Again, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. But we all want to succeed in the end. We all want to work together and succeed. We all know we're going to make mistakes throughout the journey, but it's when you can get together and communicate and work together, that's the key, so that everyone can move on and be successful.
Awesome. So with that, I want to thank Nigeria and Kim for your expertise, for your patience with me as we were trying to figure all of this out. This has been a project that I've been talking with Kim about for quite some time, and I'm so glad we finally got it to recording, got to this moment. And I want to thank everybody for listening. We can offer this training live through Zoom for your club for free, and we also offer customized training. All you have to do is reach out to me at swaldron@usagym.org. And with that, thanks everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.